Think about the last time you wanted to do something, and before you did it, you checked. Maybe you did not check out loud. Maybe it was not a formal conversation. But something in you scanned the environment, looked around at the people closest to you, ran a quiet internal calculation about how this decision would land, how it would be received, whether the people whose opinion matters to you would understand it, support it, or at minimum not judge it too harshly. And somewhere in that calculation, maybe consciously, maybe not, the decision you made got shaped by what you found, not entirely by what you actually wanted, partially by what you thought would be approved of. Most men live their entire lives inside that calculation. They have never made a truly independent decision. Every choice has been run through the filter of other people's potential reaction first. The career was chosen partly because it sounded respectable to the right people. The relationship was continued longer than it should have been because ending it would have required explanations nobody wanted to give. The ambition was kept small because a bigger version of it would have invited skepticism from people whose opinion felt important at the time. This is not weakness in the simple sense of the word. It is the result of a psychological dependency that most men develop so early and so gradually that they never recognize it for what it is, a cage they built around themselves using other people's opinions as the bars. The Sigma male does not live in that cage, not because he does not care about other people, not because he has no relationships or no respect for the people in his life, but because at some point he disconnected his ability to move forward from any external permission structure. He realized, through observation, through experience, or through the particular kind of pain that comes from living too long by other people's standards, that approval is not a foundation. It is a weather pattern. It changes constantly. It is influenced by factors that have nothing to do with the quality of your decisions, and any life built on it will shift every time the weather does. Welcome to Silent Wise. Stay for the full video. Subscribe if this is where you belong. Let's get into it. 1. He understands that approval is borrowed power. The first thing the Sigma male understands that most men do not is the fundamental nature of approval itself. Approval is not something you own. It is something you borrow. When another person approves of your decision, your direction, your identity, your choices, they are lending you a feeling of legitimacy. And like all borrowed things, it can be recalled at any moment for reasons entirely outside your control. The person who approved of your career choice last year may disapprove this year because their own circumstances changed. The relationship that provided you consistent validation may withdraw that validation because of something entirely unrelated to you. The social group that affirmed your identity may shift its standards and leave your identity outside them without warning. This is the structural problem with building your ability to move forward on approval. You are building on ground you do not own. Every time you require external permission to take the next step, you are handing control of your momentum to whoever or whatever provides that permission. And momentum that depends on external permission is not really yours. It belongs, in a very real sense, to the people whose approval you require. They can stop it at any time, simply by withholding what you have trained yourself to need before moving. The Sigma male has traced this logic to its conclusion and made a decision based on what he found. He will not build his ability to move on borrowed ground. He will not require something he does not control as a prerequisite for taking the next step. This does not mean he ignores all input from others. A man who cannot receive useful information from external sources is not independent. He is simply blind in a different way. The Sigma male is fully capable of taking information from others, weighing it honestly, and incorporating what is genuinely useful. What he has removed is the requirement that others validate the decision before he can execute it. The difference between taking information from others and requiring approval from others is the difference between using a resource and being dependent on one. The Sigma male uses external input as one data point among many. He does not require it as the permission structure that allows him to move. That permission structure was always internal. It was always his. He simply had to recognize that and stop outsourcing it to people who were never qualified to hold it in the first place. 2. He has built an internal standard that outranks external opinion. The reason most men require external approval before moving forward is that they have never built a strong enough internal standard to replace it. They do not have a clear, specific self-generated framework for evaluating their own decisions, So they use other people's reactions as a proxy. If the people around them seem to approve, the decision probably makes sense. If they seem skeptical or critical, maybe it needs to be reconsidered. The external reaction becomes the primary tool for self-assessment, because no internal tool of comparable clarity exists. The Sigma male has built the internal tool. Over time, through self-examination and honest reflection, and the deliberate process of developing his own values and judgment, he has constructed an internal standard against which he measures his decisions directly. Not a perfect standard, not an infallible one, but a genuine self-generated framework that belongs entirely to him, and that he trusts more than he trusts the reactive opinion of people who do not have full access to his situation, his reasoning, his values, or his long-term direction. This internal standard asks different questions than the approval-seeking mind asks. The approval-seeking mind asks, will this be accepted? Will people understand it? Will it invite criticism? Will it maintain my standing in the eyes of the people who matter to me? The Sigma male's internal standard asks, does this align with what I actually value? Is this the right direction given what I know about my situation and my goals? Is this consistent with the kind of man I have decided to be? Can I defend this decision to myself with full honesty? The answers to these questions are not dependent on anyone else's reaction. They are generated internally, evaluated internally, and decided internally. When a man has this kind of internal standard operating clearly, external opinion does not stop his momentum because it was never the thing that started it. His momentum comes from internal alignment, the sense that what he is doing is consistent with who he is and where he is going. Other people's approval can confirm that alignment, but it cannot create it. And other people's disapproval can challenge it, but it cannot destroy it if the internal foundation is solid enough. That foundation is what the Sigma male spent the time to build, and it is what allows him to move forward, regardless of what the external environment reflects back at him. 3. He has learned that most disapproval is not about him. One of the most liberating realizations a man can reach is the understanding that most of the disapproval he receives for his choices has very little to do with the actual quality of those choices. It has to do with how those choices interact with the psychology, the fears, the limitations, and the comfort zones of the people doing the disapproving. When someone tells you that your ambition is unrealistic, they are most often reporting on their own relationship with risk, rather than making an accurate assessment of your specific situation. When someone questions why you are taking the harder road, they are usually telling you that the harder road frightens them, not that it is wrong for you. When someone withdraws approval because your choices no longer fit the familiar version of you they were comfortable with, they are protecting their own sense of how the world should be organized, not providing useful feedback about your direction. The Sigma male has done the work to understand this dynamic, not so that he can dismiss all criticism as irrelevant. Some criticism is genuinely useful, and he is honest enough to receive it when it is, but so that he can distinguish between feedback that contains real information about his decisions and feedback that contains information primarily about the psychological state of the person delivering it. This distinction is crucial. A man who cannot make it is at the mercy of every person around him who has strong opinions about what he should do. And strong opinions are always in abundant supply, regardless of the quality of the thinking behind them. When you understand that most disapproval is a projection of the disapprover's own psychology rather than an accurate external assessment of your choices, the weight of that disapproval changes entirely. It stops being evidence about the quality of your decision and becomes instead information about the internal world of the person expressing it. You can receive it with genuine curiosity. What does this person's reaction tell me about them? Without being moved by it in any way that disrupts your momentum. You can hear it fully, process it honestly, extract whatever small amount of genuine useful signal exists within it, and continue forward with no alteration to your direction, unless the actual content of the feedback, not the emotional weight of it, gives you reason to reconsider. That ability to process disapproval without being derailed by it is not coldness. It is clarity, and it is only available to the man who has already done the work to understand what disapproval actually is. 4. He has separated his identity from other people's perception of him. The approval trap has its deepest roots in identity. When a man's sense of who he is becomes entangled with how other people perceive him, Their perception becomes something he must manage and maintain as a matter of psychological survival. If others see him as successful, he feels successful. If others see him as capable, he feels capable. If others withdraw that positive perception or replace it with skepticism or dismissal, his sense of self takes a direct hit. And a man whose sense of self takes direct hits from external perception will do almost anything to prevent those hits, including abandoning his own direction whenever it threatens to invite them. The Sigma male has done the work of separating his identity from external perception. Not perfectly. No man achieves this completely, but to a degree that fundamentally changes how much power other people's opinions have over his behavior. He has built an identity rooted in his values, his standards, his way of operating, and his relationship with his own judgment. That identity does not require other people's recognition to be real. It exists independent of whether anyone around him sees it clearly, appreciates it, or approves of the choices it produces. This separation was not comfortable to build. It required going through periods where external perception was negative or absent, and choosing to maintain his internal sense of self through those periods rather than adjusting his direction to recover the external approval. Every time he held his identity stable, despite negative external perception, he was strengthening the separation between the two. He was proving to himself that his sense of who he is does not depend on what others reflect back at him. That proof accumulated over time into something durable, an identity that is genuinely self-contained and genuinely his. The practical consequence of this is that the Sigma male's momentum cannot be stopped by perception management the way most men's momentum can. You cannot slow him down by disapproving of his direction, because his direction does not require your approval to feel valid to him. You cannot destabilize him by questioning his choices in front of others, because his sense of self does not live in public perception. He knows who he is independent of whether anyone around him agrees. And a man who knows who he is cannot be confused about it by people who have only seen the surface. 5. He understands that approval-seeking is a losing game by design. The approval-seeking game is structurally designed to be unwinnable. Not because the people whose approval you seek are malicious, but because the nature of approval itself makes total, stable, permanent validation from others an impossibility. People's standards change, their moods change, their own circumstances change, and alter the lens through which they evaluate you. The social group's norms shift. What was approved of last year becomes complicated this year. The validation you earned through one version of yourself becomes conditional when you attempt to grow into a different version. The game has no finish line, because the finish line moves every time you approach it. The Sigma male has seen this clearly enough to stop playing. He has observed what the approval game produces in the men who play it longest and most completely. Not security, not belonging, not the stable sense of being seen and accepted that the game promises, but an escalating dependency that requires more and more management over time, more performance, more adjustment of genuine self to fit current social expectations, more energy spent monitoring how he is being perceived and making the corrections needed to maintain the positive signal. The game is expensive and it never pays out what it advertises. He has also understood the opportunity cost of playing it. Every hour a man spends managing his approval, performing for his social environment, adjusting his choices to maintain validation, worrying about how his decisions will be received, is an hour not spent on his actual work, his actual development, his actual direction. The approval game does not just fail to deliver what it promises. It actively drains the resources that would be going towards something real if they were not being consumed by the performance of acceptability. The Sigma male redirected those resources. The energy that could have gone into monitoring and managing social perception went instead into the work, into skill development, into building something that does not depend on constant performance to maintain its existence, into becoming a man whose results speak clearly enough that the question of approval becomes largely irrelevant, not because he forced others to approve of him, but because what he built made the question of his approval status a secondary concern to everyone who encountered it. Results have a way of making the approval conversation unnecessary, and the Sigma male was always more interested in producing results than in winning conversations. 6. He has experienced what approval dependence actually costs. The Sigma male's freedom from approval seeking is not always the result of pure philosophical clarity reached in the abstract. For many men who eventually arrive at this independence, it was earned through a more direct and more painful route. The lived experience of what approval dependence actually costs when the cost becomes impossible to ignore. There is a moment for many men where the distance between the life they are living and the life they would choose if they stopped seeking approval becomes undeniable, where the accumulation of adjusted decisions, modified ambitions, and abandoned directions adds up to a picture that is clearly and painfully not theirs. This moment is not comfortable. Recognizing that a significant portion of the choices that produced your current life were shaped by the need for external validation rather than by your own honest assessment of what you wanted, that recognition carries weight. It demands a reckoning. Some men encounter this reckoning and turn away from it because the discomfort of confronting it is too significant. They find ways to reframe the situation, to tell themselves a story that makes the approval-shaped life look like the one they actually chose. And they continue. The Sigma male, when this moment arrives, does not turn away from it. He looks at it directly. He accounts for what the approval-seeking cost him, and he decides that it will not continue to cost him at the same rate. This accounting is painful, but it is also clarifying in the way that only honest confrontation with an uncomfortable truth can be. The man who has felt the specific cost of approval dependence, the career path that was not his, the relationship maintained for social reasons, the ambition kept small to avoid judgment, the direction not taken because the permission never came, has a very specific and personal motivation to build something different. Not an abstract philosophical motivation, a lived one. The kind that does not fade when the going gets hard because it is rooted in something he actually experienced rather than something he read about. From that accounting, he builds differently. He stops running the approval calculation before each decision. He stops checking the social environment before moving. He starts making choices based on the intersection of what he genuinely values and what his honest judgment tells him is right. And he accepts, fully and without resentment, that some of those choices will not be understood or approved of by the people around him. That acceptance is not indifference, it is freedom, earned through the specific cost of not having it. 7. Moving without approval is what creates the life worth approving of. Here is the final irony of the approval game, and it is significant enough to be its own point. The men who eventually earn the deepest and most genuine respect from others. Not the shallow, conditional approval that comes from performance, but the real respect that comes from watching a man build something authentic and enduring, are almost always the men who stopped seeking approval first. The willingness to move without external permission is precisely what produces the kind of trajectory that eventually makes the permission irrelevant, because the results make the case better than any argument ever could. When a man consistently moves in a direction that he chose for his own reasons, maintains that direction through periods when it is not understood or approved of, produces results through sustained commitment to his own standards, rather than through compliance with others' expectations, something happens over time to how people relate to him. The respect they develop is qualitatively different from the approval he would have received for performing acceptably. Approval says, "You did what I expected of you, and I acknowledge it." Respect says, "You did something I did not fully understand, and I can now see that it was right." One is contingent on your behavior fitting within someone's existing framework. The other is produced when your behavior expands their framework entirely. The Sigma male who moved without approval did not set out to earn this kind of respect. He set out to build the life that his own judgment and values pointed toward. The respect is a byproduct, a secondary consequence of the primary commitment to independence. He cannot seek it directly because seeking it would require reintroducing the approval mechanism he removed. He can only produce it by continuing to do what he was already doing, moving forward according to his own internal direction, without waiting for permission from anyone outside. This is the completion of the principle. The man who needs approval cannot produce the life that earns deep respect, because the need for approval shapes his decisions in ways that prevent the authentic, courageous, self-directed trajectory that genuine respect responds to. The man who moves without approval, who builds according to his own internal standards, who maintains his direction through the seasons when nobody is validating it. That man produces something worth respecting, not because he tried to, but because he stopped trying to be approved of and started trying to be real. Those are different projects, and only one of them produces a life that is actually his. 7 points. 7 layers of why the Sigma male never needs anyone's approval to move forward, and why that independence is not arrogance, not coldness, not disconnection from other people. It is the result of a specific set of realizations built over time into a specific way of operating. Approval is borrowed power he refuses to depend on. He has an internal standard that outranks external opinion. He understands that most disapproval is not about him. He has separated his identity from other people's perception. He sees the approval game as unwinnable by design. He has felt the real cost of approval dependence and decided not to keep paying it. And he understands that moving without approval is exactly what produces the life that eventually earns something far more valuable than approval ever was. The man who waits for permission will wait a long time. The permission rarely comes in the form he is waiting for. And while he waits, the window for the thing he was going to do with the permission stays open for a while and then quietly closes. The Sigma male does not wait. He assesses his own situation with the most honest judgment he has. He moves according to what that judgment tells him, and he keeps moving whether the social environment applauds or questions or ignores what he is doing, because his momentum was never theirs to give. This is silent wise. If this video gave you something real today, put it in front of one man who is waiting for permission he already has the right to give himself. Subscribe and stay on the path. There is more coming. And before you go, one question to sit with today. What decision have you been waiting for someone else to approve that you already know in your own judgment is the right one? You already know the answer. You always did. This is Silent Wise. Stay silent. Stay free. Stay dangerous.